dark Texas road near Dayton, Betty Cash stopped her Oldsmobile Cutlass beside Vicki Landrum and 7-year-old Colby. Above the trees, they counted 23 helicopters around a diamond-shaped object. The object was described as hovering low, near treetop level, with flames coming from its base. If that is what they saw, sure enough, the bill would come later. This case could cost the plaintiffs their health claims, their credibility, and any chance of compensation. Before the ruling, you decide. The question is whether a roadside nightmare became a provable federal injury, or whether it remained only a frightening account that could not be tied to the government. Betty Cash was 51 years old and drove the Cutlass herself. The record shows she later spent about 12 days in the hospital, then returned for another 15 days. That means the first stay was close to 2 weeks, and the second was about half a month more. A long stretch of treatment for something that began on one roadside night. Her ordinary life had already started to narrow before the lawsuit ever began. Vicki Landrum was 57, traveling with her grandson Colby on December 29, 1980. The plaintiffs claimed the encounter left them with heat exposure, burns, blisters, hair loss, weakness, and related symptoms. In plain terms, they were saying the night did not just scare them. It hurt them in ways that lasted, showing up later as physical problems rather than only fear in the moment. The object was described as huge, diamond-shaped and hovering at treetop level with flames from its base. Cash said the metal body of her car hurt to touch. That is a concrete kind of detail. The car itself felt too hot or too painful to lean on. Not just the air around it, as if the surface had taken on the heat of the encounter. Landrum said the dashboard vinyl softened and left an imprint. In ordinary language, that means the surface was described as warm enough to change shape and hold a mark, like material that had gone from firm to pliable and then kept the trace. That is the kind of detail people remember when the rest of the night refuses to behave. They contacted Senators Lloyd Bentsen and John Tower. The senators directed them to the Judge Advocate Claims Office at Bergstrom Air Force Base. In practical terms, that meant they were pushed from a political office into the military claims system, where a complaint would be handled as a request for compensation rather than as a public debate. The government side began with records, not rumors. In 1982, Lieutenant Colonel George Saran conducted the formal Army investigation and found no evidence that the helicopters belonged to the U.S. Armed Forces. In other words, the Army could not match the helicopters the witnesses described to any military helicopters it could document, list, or verify in its own files. Saran also treated the witnesses as credible. He did not treat that as proof of military involvement. That distinction matters. A person can be sincere, frightened, and consistent while still being mistaken about what was in the sky or who was responsible for it. The government also brought NASA, the Air Force, the Army, and the Navy into the record. Their testimony stated that no agency possessed the reported UFO and no military personnel operated the reported helicopters. Put plainly, the agencies did not just deny the story. They denied having the thing, the cruise or the operation the plaintiffs were describing. Peter Gersten took the case pro bono. That meant he represented the plaintiffs without charging them for his time or legal work. The plaintiffs now had a lawyer willing to carry an extraordinary claim into federal court and present it as a civil demand worth hearing. One side said a government-linked aircraft event caused lasting harm. The other side said the records showed no such government event at all. Those stories could not both survive the same courtroom because the case depended on whether the helicopters were real military assets or only the witnesses' description of what they believed they saw. In August 1981, the witnesses were interviewed at Bergstrom Air Force Base, where they were told to hire a lawyer and seek compensation for their injuries. After that, Cash and Landrum sued the U.S. federal government for $20 million. The case then waited for proof. The central issue became whether any military helicopter force had been there at all. Without military involvement, the federal claim had no target to pin down because the lawsuit needed a real government actor behind the alleged harm. The case record includes the witness's account first, a diamond-shaped object, flames from below, and 23 helicopters in tight formation. The scene was vivid enough to stay in the room, not because it was simple, but because it was specific in the way remembered events often are. The government presented testimony from NASA, the Air Force, the Army, and the Navy. The court heard that no agency possessed the reported UFO and no military personnel operated the helicopters. In plain terms, the defense was saying there was no official object in any inventory and no official flight crew in any record, so the claimed event could not be tied to a government operation. Betty Cash's car became a quiet piece of evidence. Cash said the metal body hurt to touch, and Landrum said the dashboard vinyl softened and left an imprint. Taken together, those details describe a car that seemed to have been physically affected by heat, with surfaces changing enough to be noticed and remembered later. Skeptical investigators later argued that the medical evidence did not support radiation poisoning. That left the plaintiffs with symptoms, but not a clean scientific bridge to the object they described. In other words, the injuries were part of the story, but the science did not neatly connect those injuries to the claimed source. The testimony never produced a military helicopter roster, a logged UFO, or a government unit tied to the scene. The case narrowed to a question of proof, and proof was the one thing that kept slipping away, even as the witness's account stayed fixed in the record. The witness's account stands on one side. The government's records stand on the other. One side says the injuries began on that road. The other says the record shows no military event at all. Give me your ruling in the comments. Here's what the court actually found. On August 21st, 1986, the U.S. District Court dismissed the case. The court was persuaded by testimony from NASA, the Air Force, the Army, and the Navy that no agency possessed the reported UFO and no military personnel operated the reported helicopters. The plaintiffs received no damages. Betty Cash died on December 29, 1998. Vicki Landrum died on September 12, 2007. The lawsuit ended without compensation, so the plaintiffs left court without any damages payment for the injuries they said followed the roadside encounter. The $20 million demand was never paid. Colby Landrum remained the child in the back seat. The adults spent years trying to make the event legible to institutions, first through claims offices and then through the court system. The court ruled the question is whether the legal record was enough to connect the reported helicopters and the claimed injuries to the government. Next time, a case where the defendant is literally a dinosaur. Stay with the court found for the next ruling.